Steam Next Fest returns, and with it thousands of new demos to sift through. With so many fresh releases springing up at once, it can be hard to tell what's worth your time now and maybe your money when they hit a full release. So I put together another round of rapid fire recommendations, highlighting some standout demos for the often deserved Mac and Steam Deck. So without further delay, here are my top picks from February 2026's showcase. Public transport gets a dose of Dreamcast-era daftness in Denshattack. Easily the standout demo with this Next Fest, and already one of the more anticipated titles this year following its Gamescom reveal. Now that I finally had hands-on time with it, I get the hype, and can also confirm it runs brilliantly on Steam Deck. The pitch is simple, but the execution's inspired. Denshattack takes everyday train conducting and turns it into the next extreme sport. In its neon urban fantasy, old carriages aren't just rolling stock but rockets on rails, launching between tracks, snapping into wild turns and pulling off ridiculous spin tricks like 40-ton skateboards. And that's before you start making maneuvers like riding a Ferris wheel over a shoreline. Sure, railway meets rail grinding sounds like an obvious mashup in hindsight, but Denshattack goes beyond being an easy joke into genuine mechanical bliss. The handling feels fantastic, snappy and responsive, with a rhythm to it that lands somewhere between Guitar Hero's quick lane switching and that classic Tony Hawk loop of chaining tricks without dropping your flow. It's an auto-runner at heart, which makes sense seeing as you're literally on a rail, but you're constantly making micro decisions throughout, keeping an eye on the track ahead whilst nursing a combo, or while the train threatens to slip out from underneath you. My favourite bit is in how it turns taking bends into its own skill. There's a drifting mechanic where you're feathering the brake at just the right moment, and when you nail it, it has that same clean and clicky satisfaction as a perfect reload in Gears of War. As expected, this is the kind of game built for mastery, though I surprised myself by already pulling in a few silver medals in the demo. It's definitely not a pushover, and I still launched myself off the track more than once after forgetting a couple of taught once never repeated controls. But if you're the sort of person who lives for clean execution, this is absolutely one to watch. It has me excited to see what speedrunners and high scorers will do with systems. Visually, Denshattack is pitch perfect too, and as mentioned, it runs nicely on Valve's handheld. The cutscenes pop in a playful, hand-drawn manga style, and the gameplay leans into crisp cell shading. Bold, processed colours with thick black outlines that keep everything legible, even when you're flying through the city at full tilt. All the while set to a soundtrack that wouldn't be out of place in a boost-era Sonic the Hedgehog game. Maybe not a total shock, considering its contributions from Sonic Mania's T. Lopes and Penny's big breakaways Andrew 1. The demo is smartly paced, starting off with a few slower tutorials to get you moving, then ramping up into looser action set pieces. It even caps things off with a scaled up skate park style arena built around a dedicated trick challenge. As a snapshot of what the full game's aiming for, it's a strong one, and I'm already keen to see more. Densha is a love letter to that late 90s cool Japan wave where Dragon Ball Z and Pokemon started dominating Western television, and the jump to 3D consoles meant games could finally chase that same anime energy in motion, not just the box art. It has real gateway potential that could pull people into both the extreme sports and the anime style games it's drawing from, not a wink wink parody as much as an affectionate pastiche, chugging down the same lane as Neon White or Bomber or Cyberpunk. Either way, this is one train you don't want to miss, so mind the gap and hop on Denshattack. Shifting gears from high-speed railway action to something slower and more thoughtful, Rhell, Warped Worlds and Troubled Times is a brilliantly indie spin on classic Zelda design. Fortunately, not another Link's Awakening homage, it feels in conversation with 2024's Echoes of Wisdom. Where that game is about conjuring props and directing AI-driven monsters to solve problems, Rhell leans hard into a kind of programmer's playground approach. You play as a sage in training, armed with nothing but a torn-up spellbook, and your magic takes the form of small but chainable actions that manipulate the world. It starts simple with a basic push spell that shunts any 3D objects, including yourself, forward a few feet. That's enough to solve Rhell's early problems in clever ways, like sliding an entire wall of jail bars in the opening sequence, but as the demo opens up, you get fun modifiers that freeze objects into slippery ice or transform them into a bouncy goop, allowing you to rewrite the physical rules of a room. You can even summon scarecrows that cast spells for you, which turns puzzles into these layered little contraptions you assemble on the fly. In the Zelda tradition of keys and gadgets gating progression, Rhell tests you on how well you can combine your growing toolkit, rather than whether you found the one correct answer. It's very much in that Breath of the Wild Echoes of Wisdom's mold, open-ended challenges with multiple viable solutions. I know that style isn't for everyone. Sometimes you want that clean Portal-like click of discovering the intended answer, but Rhell does a good job of keeping the momentum up. The rooms are compact, the tools are flexible, and it rarely feels like you've run out of options. Best of all, there's a smart quality of life touch. You can reset any screen from the options menu, so if you've scuffed up a setup or soft-locked a puzzle, you're never stuck with it. That same loose improvisational energy runs through everything around the puzzles too. Visually, it has this Adventure Time adjacent charm, teeming with expressive character design squelching through a handcrafted world. The writing matches it, light on its feet and a little absurd, full of NPCs which is quirky enough to bounce nicely off your protagonist's perpetual irritation. On Steam Deck, I did need to drop the resolution to get it running at its best, but once I did, it was smooth sailing with no real hiccups despite all its physics play, and the style holds up well on a smaller screen. And honestly, the format suits handheld play. With its room-by-room structure and relatively breezy narrative, it feels like the kind of portable adventure you can dip into for 10 minutes, hit a puzzle, then put down and let your brain chew on a solution, before hopping back in to try the thing you just thought of. As a demo, it's only a small slice of what seems like a much bigger journey, but even with the limited spell list on offer, you can already feel the potential. Rhell encourages you to be a mad scientist to find your own way through, which is the kind of design that'll really click for anyone who loves pushing the limits of physics and chemistry style systems. That open-ended approach can be a harder sell in a long-running series like Zelda, where a lot of players come in craving an authored puzzle box feel, but because Rhell is its own world with its own rules, it feels freer, like you can lean into the sandbox without expectations getting in the way. If the full game expands that spellbook and keeps the level design as playful as the demo suggests, Rhell could end up being something really special. Next best isn't short on familiar ideas, and while I've tried to focus on games that feel fresh, I still spent a fair bit of time dipping into very obvious knockoffs, just in case one of them turned out to be phenomenal. For example, I put a few hours into Gone Bonanza, which answers the question, what if Balatro was Speed Chest? I'm sure it will be someone's obsession, but it's unfortunately not to my taste. That said, I do want to shout out Stickball, which even from footage alone wears its look be a landlord influences confidently. Instead of a slot machine, you've got this full wall of dice faces you can overwrite with stickers, generating everything from UFOs and robot vacuum cleaners to taped up bananas. It's got a pretty manic relationship with random modifiers, but honestly, if you're arriving in the wake of the current roguelike wave, you have to pick a lane, either refine the formula or go full maximalist, and Stickball proudly chooses the latter. The core loop is a great twist on the make number go up template. The dice act like bumpers on a board, and you're firing a bouncing ball around to collide with them and generate points. It's Boolean air adjacent in spirit, sure, but where that's chasing pachinko energy, this feels more like table pool, lining up angles, planning ricochets, and trying to turn one clean shot into a whole chain reaction. The word I'd use for Stickball is generous, not because it's easy, I still haven't made it 16 rounds, but because it's constantly trying to help you play well. It traces the ball's path before you launch, so you can take a moment to find the exact angle for a perfect bounce, and it's refreshingly clear in how it communicates its systems. There's no status effects you need a wiki to decode, the item descriptions are plain English, and the cause and effect is easy to understand. That clarity is what makes it stand out from a lot of Balatro-inspired copycats. Local Thug's game works because the language is simple, the scoring rules are clean, and the game is built on poker hands is instantly understandable. That simplicity is what lets the synergies become the interesting part. Stickball gets that. Within a few runs, I was already spotting opportunities like matching up modifiers to power them up and planning my boards around those little interactions rather than just praying for good rolls. And I really appreciate how much character it has, and not just because it keeps up the tradition of having visible bosses tied to each round. The art isn't a sweaty imitation, borrowing Balatro's CRT filters and chromatic aberration to trick you that it's from the same developer, and it's not leaning on generative gloss to fake AAA production value. It's proudly hand-drawn in a very MS Paint sort of way, but it still understands the fundamentals well enough to stay completely legible in motion. Even the music commits to the bit, low-fidelity teletext jazz that fits the laid-back pinball at your desk energy it's going for. I really like Stickball, and while part of that is absolutely down to how smartly it borrows from the roguelike wave, it's also a great example of the good artist's steel mantra. It takes what works, then makes it feel singular. You can spot familiar ingredients, sure, but at no point did I find myself wishing I was playing the games it was drawing from instead. If it's priced sensibly, I can honestly see this becoming one of those perfect little giftable time sinks for anyone seeking something fresh in a sea of Balatro likes. On a practical note, this feels best as a second screen pointer-driven game, something you can chew on while in a Discord call or watching YouTube videos. While I might have been able to get it running on Steam Deck, instead I chose crossover on Mac to get into that mouse and monitor mindset. It's not exactly something I'd prescribe paying £100 a year for, but if the dev is watching and fancies selling a few more copies, a native Mac version would be very welcome. Speaking of games that have been endlessly iterated on since release, it's a little ironic that the title that kicked off the Bullet Heaven Gold Rush back in 2022 is now borrowing ideas itself. Set in the world of Ponkel's smash hit Vampire Survivors, Vampire Crawlers fuses its monster-slaying slot machine dopamine with the classic RPG staple of dungeon crawling, and a splash of deck battling for good measure. The opening visual does a great job of selling that shift. Those flat, open battlefields from Vampire Survivors gets tilted back and squeezed into tight corridors, turning enemy waves into neat chorus lines of creeps to carve through. And in a nice nod to the original, you can still keep things hands off. If you don't fancy manually choosing attacks from a shuffled hand, you can set them to auto-fire with a tap of the X button. That simplicity is a big part of why it works. Like Vampire Survivors, everything is immediately legible, and the now iconic items translate surprisingly well into this forward-facing format. My favourite bit of that transformation is Pascalina's Rune Tracer. Instead of ricocheting around an open field, it pings around the screen itself, carving straight through any entity it passes over. The juicy feedback of VS also runs throughout, be it chests bursting open in a hail of god rays or a little giant hammer that smashes runes on your cards. Honestly, I was caught off guard by how cleanly it all clicks together. The exploration isn't the most inventive spin on the genre, even if it is one of the funniest purely for how unapologetically bullish it is, but the moment-to-moment decision-making feels sharp, whether it's weighing up how many fights to take on per floor or which upgrades to pursue. And true to Vampire Survivors' form, every build eventually escalates into a dazzling spray of screen-filling effects. Dungeon crawlers can be slow and creaky at the best of times, so I really appreciate how brisk this is. That also makes it a perfect fit for Steam Deck, which feels oddly full circle given how tied Vampire Survivors became to Valve's handheld, a little feedback loop where the game and the hardware boosted each other into becoming essentially the modern-day Tetris on Game Boy. Vampire Crawlers is a touch more adventure flavoured than pure arcade, so it might not hit that exact same plug-in and melt ethos, though it's not far off. I've already sunk a few hours into it myself. It's a testament to Ponkel that they can translate the addictive appeal of the original into a completely different format. There's also a decent amount to chew on in the demo already, 2 different flavours of randomly generated dungeon plus a steady drip of roguelike unlocks between runs that gives you that one more go momentum. I'll be honest, I'm probably not the best person to declare what makes the ideal dungeon crawler, so if you want a deeper appreciation for the genre, check out Brendan Hess's excellent YouTube channel The Crawl. But speaking for myself, I found filtering the familiar trappings of dungeon crawling through Vampire Survivors' stripped-back, dopamine-friendly design very effective. In the same way games like Absalom re-energize the brawler structure for a broader audience, Vampire Crawlers gives this old format a real shot in the spotlight, which may hopefully bleed over to some of the absolute classics the genre has to offer.
From the creators of Ancient Enemy and Home Safety Hotline,
gathered in protest of a controversial new video game,
comes a state-of-the-art CD-ROM experience.
No reason for it to be this violent. It's f***ing solitaire!
It's ironic that, as games keep pushing towards photorealism, so many developers are turning back to the past, using nostalgia as texture similar to the crackle of vinyl of VHS Warble. Steam Next Fest is never short on projects doing their best impression of another era, and there's a few this time round I'd like to highlight. Forbidden Solitaire might be one of the most spot-on pastiches of full-motion horror games I've seen in a while. With its awkward photo references mashed into crude CG environments, it creates that specific kind of uncanny cheapness that still works as atmosphere. It's mid-90s in its slightly brainless Doom and Mortal Kombat approach to shock schlock, full of mutilations, blood sprays, and spooky, scary skeletons. The whole game keeps you slightly on edge, all while you're just playing a stripped-down version of Solitaire. On the flip side, Blast Cats feels like it's pulled from that late 90s sweet spot between the PS1 and Dreamcast, and it's absolutely soaked in the influence of Treasure's small but distinctive run of 3D platformers like Wario World and Stretch Panic. You can feel it in the slightly strange, unapologetically unwesternized tone of demonic imagery folded into bright, kid-friendly nonsense. Mechanically, is built around constructive destruction, armed with a sledgehammer, bombs, and missiles. Each stage is less about pure platforming precision and instead smashing your way forward, finding the route, flipping switches, and staying alive against the usual enemy roster as the level tries to box you in. It also has a pretty bonkers soundtrack, and some of its sample choices actually threw me for a loop. But my top pick in this loose category of faux lost gems might be the most impressive on a fake technical level. Before the era of the Dreamcast and even FMVs, there was the early Amiga and Commodore demo scene, and Bad Pixels has the audacity to ask, what if you took those hardware limits, with a little creative wiggle room, and used them to build a full-on first-person shooter? The result is one of the most striking shooters I've played this fest. It's set in a cowboy world of such simplified geometry that it starts to look like abstract Bauhaus pop art. Checkerboard desert grounds, cactus shapes that read as toppled cubes, and townsfolk flattened into simplified silhouettes. If the idea is that you're playing some mythical missing link, the wild frontier that had to exist before the industrial leap to Doom and eventually the modern FPS, then it's a brilliantly executed bit. Mechanically, it's a surprisingly solid little systemic shooter. Each run has you clearing out enemies threatening your tiny town, but you don't have to do it alone. You can round up a posse by walking up to any grey figure and paying them to become a deputy, then set their behaviour to follow you or patrol the area. It's straightforward stuff, but paired with a stripped-back presentation, it feels weirdly novel, like you've uncovered honestly groundbreaking design from a timeline where this came out in 1991 and everyone forgot about it. Bad Pixels also keeps the meta element simple. It presents itself as a scene demo that's somehow been ported to modern hardware, complete with an appropriately chiptuned crack intro on boot. It should run across all platforms, but I'd hold off playing it on Mac until it has proper windowed mode support. On Steam Deck though, it worked perfectly, and full marks to the developer for shipping with a deck-friendly controller layout ready to go before Next Fest even started. It's a nice reminder that even if you're making a game that's deliberately pretending to be older than it actually is, you can still sprinkle in a few modern quality of life touches so everyone can actually get in on the joke. I call these videos the best of Next Fest because they're the best things I played during the event, though to give myself a bit of a competitive advantage I do try and skip the obvious headliners. That said, it's hard to ignore the biggest releases entirely, especially when one of them comes with as much baggage as Zero Parades for Dead Spies, one of the few Disco Elysium adjacent spiritual successors being made by those left in the wake of the original team's breakup. The story around that is messy and honestly better laid out by Papermate Games' excellent coverage. Still, I wanted to give it a fair shot for the same reason I finally sat down and finished Disco Elysium last year. It's one thing to hear that a work is good or bad from the outside, but another to actually sit with it and come away with your own conclusions. That said, it's hard to meet Zero Parades entirely on its own terms because it wears its Disco Elysium connection so openly. The painterly 3D look and its ornate UI clearly reach for that Alexander Rostov feel. Then there's the constant internal monologue and a vocal delivery that swaps Lenville Brown's rusted gravitas for a female-led performance that still leans into a strained, lived-in cadence. The game is also unabashedly still about communism, which blends in a particularly awkward way given where Zaum ended up. But here's the thing, I can't bring myself to hate it. The writing and that opening mystery is very compelling so far, even if it doesn't immediately hit the same highs Disco finds later on. If that game felt like a strange collision of FX's The Shield and post-Soviet melancholy, Zero Parades feels like it's mashing up two Gary Oldman adjacent lanes, the chilly paranoia of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy and the bitter comedy of Slow Horses. You even kick things off by finding a character who looks uncannily like Oldman himself, slumped over and barely functioning. You're not just piecing together what happened to him, but also why you're there at all. It's also interesting how the power dynamic has flipped. In Disco, you're the mess of a cop stumbling into the center of the story, while here, you're the button-up investigator, at least in appearances, while the broken-down figure on the sidelines becomes a gravitational force of his own. And rather than booze-soaked ego death doing the heavy lifting for the amnesia, it's your unexplained 5-year stint at a satellite office for burnt spies that turns you into an outsider, returning with questions that everyone else seems to have already answered. Mechanically, a lot of the DNA is intact. Combat is still off the table, and the tension comes from conversations, social maneuvering and investigation, but the team has made a few nice tweaks to the formula. In the original, taking too much physical or mental damage could end your run outright. Here, overwhelming yourself through fatigue, anxiety or delirium chips away at your base stats instead. Overextend yourself and it changes what you're good at. It's a neat idea and it makes the world feel a little less punishing in that early demo window where you're still finding your feet. It should also let players feel like they can play a little riskier, encouraging better role play. It's far too early to say whether it will capture the same lightning as Disco Elysium, but in the small pockets of chatter and character work on display, you can still feel some of that magic. One early standout is a media snob you meet in a black market scene, exactly the kind of quirky but not insufferable side character Disco was good at. At the same time, there's no getting around the lingering feeling that this is a very talented cover band being pushed by higher ups, and that even if the final game ends up being a 10 out of 10 on its own merits, it can't fully escape the context to how we got here. And that's the frustrating part, because these are ideas I want to see carried forward. RPGs without combat where drama comes from conversation and consequence, and stat systems that aren't just strength, constitution, charisma, but fractured pieces of personality. Outside of the brilliant Citizen Sleeper games, it still feels like a lot of post-disco projects end up as surface level riffs, closer to pastiche than evolution. Based on the demo though, I'll probably give the full release of Zero Parades for Dead Spies a chance, even if it feels like I'm not being a good comrade by doing so. If you're considering organising a struggle session for me, then please give me a heads up in the comments below. This roundup had a bit of something for everyone, so let me swing the spotlight onto an excellent 2D platformer, one with GBA-era panache, Super Mario Odyssey style collectathon smoothness, and just enough physics-driven rigid body silliness to keep things unpredictable. RUBATO is a great example of a title where the action is strong enough that I was willing to put up with writing that, to be fair, is not on my wavelength. Fortunately, outside of a projected introduction, it rarely gets in the way. I even got caught off guard by a few gags, including a photo mode I'll leave for the credits. But the important thing isn't the jokes, but the gameplay between them. You're a bouncy little frog with a double jump and a sticky tongue that lets you grab and throw boxes, latch onto hooks, and basically treat the environment like a toy box. On paper, it's familiar platformer kit, but it's elevated by clean and confident level design. There's a proper sense of challenge in the navigation, and a satisfying layer of exploration that makes rerunning stages feel like a reward and not a chore. That Odyssey comparison is earned too. Collectibles chain together smoothly, each one tied to a little micro-challenge or idea, so you're constantly bouncing between one more thing moments. It's got the full adventure game spread as well. Controlled tweaking minigames, big boss fights, and the kind of escalating spectacle you'd expect, just filtered through RUBATO's commitment to being a bit daft. Even when the humour didn't do it for me, the presentation kept pulling me forward. It's constantly shifting art styles and visual gimmicks, but it does it within the constraints of what could have existed in that GBA DS era, almost like a WarioWare approach to style swaps. With that really great sprite work, you'll see digitized CG, photography, even crayonish drawings, all downsampled into that handheld look, and it's backed by a soundtrack that fits the vibe perfectly. Performance-wise, it runs great on Steam Deck, but my only heads up is the controls. If you're playing on a standard pad, considering remapping or using back buttons. Being asked to move and aim while also jumping and firing your tongue can get a little naughty on the default scheme in a way you normally only worry about on an FPS, but it's definitely not a deal breaker, especially when the platforming and collectathon flow feel this good. And that wraps up my standout picks from February 2026's Steam Next Fest. As always, I'd love to hear what hidden gems I missed or which demos from this roundup you're planning to try yourself. Please drop your recommendations in the comments below. If you want even more picks, I've also got a video on demos from my DMs you can check out next. And a quick thank you to my lovely supporters over on the hot side of Patreon for making these videos possible. Until next time, I'm James, and I'll see you all in the next upload.